Tonight we learned about truth. We learned about objective truth, subjective truth. We learned about the difference between belief and truth, that Jesus is the ultimate source of truth, that we should communicate the truth in what?
Love.
Sarah?
Love.
Love. Very good, right? So what we're going to be learning about is what you say, and the way you say it matters. Did you know that? It's not just what you say, but the way you say it. Like, if you say something like, sure, like think about the different ways you can say the word sure. Sure, or like, sure, sure, right? Like, it's all about how we say it. Me and my friend thought about writing the book of dude, but then I realized, oh, there's no inflection. But anyway, like, think about the word dude and all the things that can communicate. In high school, I could communicate anything to him by calling him. Pick up the phone, I'm like, dude! And he'd be like, what happened? What's the exciting news? Or like, I pick up the phone, I'm like, dude. And he's like, what? I'd be like, dude. And he'd be like, or, dude. Right? Like, all the ways you can say dude. Or like, dude. Right? Like, think about all the things I just communicated. I didn't have to say any more. The power of the word dude is what we're going to be learning about tonight. Just kidding. All right, so you can say dude so many ways, or man, and communicate so many things. It's all about what you say, but also how you say it. Colossians 4:6 says, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Be gracious in your speech. The goal is to bring out the best in others in a conversation, not to put them down, not to cut them out. Okay. Tactics. What does the word tactics mean? Anyone know? Tactics.
Like strategy?
Very good. No one else has to answer. It's the art of arranging. It's the focusing on the situation at hand, right? So tactics is specifically what is right in front of you. For example, you have like basketball is a good analogy, and I can't believe I'm using basketball because I know nothing about it. So basically, I don't know what I'm saying. But you have a coach who comes up with the game plan, right? But then the individual players are responsible for the tactics, the in the game, in the moment situation. Or another good example is like football, where you have the coach who has the overall game plan, and then the quarterback can call audibles and call the plays right there. So tactics has to deal with the issue right at hand, and that's what we're going to be learning about tonight. I've been giving you like a game plan of what you talk about, but now I want to teach you guys all the stuff that I've been teaching you all week. How do you communicate it? Like, you get in a conversation and then you're like, oh, but how do I say it? Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So we need to be ambassadors in our approach to talk with people who are on the other side of what we believe. Knowledge. That's the first thing. An ambassador has to have good knowledge. If I go to China and I'm an ambassador from the United States, I need to know things about the United States, okay? They're like, oh, so what about this about the United States? And da-da-da. And they're like, I don't know. I just came over here. Like, you need to know about what you're talking about. Wisdom. Wisdom is the artful method, meaning how you arrange the information. Character. We need to do it in an attractive manner, right? An ambassador, if they're just like flipping out and getting all angry, right, it's bad reflection on the nation. So in the same way, we have to have good character. All right. Stone in the shoe. How many of you guys ever got a rock in your shoe? Anybody have it? You know what's the worst? I wear these blue high-top Vans. Okay, I'm not wearing them today sometimes. And they like lace all the way up above the ankle. Do you know how hard those things are to get off? And I'm like, how did a rock get in there anyway? Like literally, I do not know how. But it's in there, and then it's right there in the foot, and you're like, oh man. And then you're like, I'm just gonna deal with it. And you're just like, they're like, is you got something in your eye? What happened to your hip? You need a hip replacement? You're like, oh, I got a rock in my shoe. Like, why don't you take it out? Because I'm wearing high tops, right? So you ever have that situation? That's what we want to do to other people. You're like, I'm not following. When it comes to communicating with people, our goal should just be to put a rock in their shoe. What does that mean? It may surprise you to hear this, but I never set out to convert anyone. My aim is never to win someone to Christ. I have a more modest goal, or you might consider adopting as your own. All I want to do is put a stone in someone's shoe. I want to give him something worth thinking about, something he can't ignore, because it continues to poke at him in a good way. Meaning this, I want to give somebody something to think about where they're not necessarily like, all right, I want to accept Jesus right now, which would be awesome, and I'd love that, but something that causes them to go, man, I got to think about this. I got to deal with this. A perfect example is at fifth quarter, I got the opportunity to share Jesus with the entire group. And it's hard. I don't know if you've ever tried to share about something that is asking people to repent to 95 kids in a single room, and you're trying to catch all their attention when there's loud music and stuff. Try it sometime. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, so I'm sharing. What did I do? I just tried to put things in people's minds. We talked, I gave people $20. People always pays attention to money, right? And I said, you're willing to sell your headphones for $20, and I asked, how much would you sell your eyes for? No one said they would sell their eyes. And then I asked, how much would you sell your soul for? And people were like, I would never sell my soul. And I pointed out that many people are selling their soul for a lot less. Meaning they're focusing on all these other things and they never take the time to think about their eternal destiny, about God, or anything like that. Now for me, if I heard that as a teenager, I'd be like, dang, I got to think about this. This is a big deal. So saying things that just put something in their mind that they have to take the time, and take their shoe off, do some research, and deal with whatever been's put in their head, right? Blaine.
On a show, this kid sold his soul to another kid for $5, and so they were writing words on the refrigerator, the door, and when he breathed, he couldn't breathe on the thing. And,
Oh, okay,
he
all right.
was feeling weak and all that, and then he got the soul back.
Okay. Yeah. Moral of the story that Blaine's saying is don't sell your soul for $5.
What does it mean when you sell your soul? What happens like that?
Oh, it's not possible
You
to really
commit.
sell your soul.
You commit.
So what I meant is that it's a figure of speech that you're willing to chase after money, girls, your own pleasure, your own life, and never take the time to think about God. That's what I mean. And basically you die before you ever accept Jesus into your life. That's what I mean by selling your soul. Meaning that you spent your whole life on something else other than God. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's all of it I look at. Now let's look at a 10-second window. All right, 10-second window. You can't take the Bible too seriously because it was only written by men, and men make mistakes. Okay, so let's imagine we have a situation. So example 1. So imagine that you're in a situation where you only have 10 seconds to say something. Oh my. I was the other day listening to a conversation. I was like, I really want to jump in. I really want to jump in. But you only have a window where you can actually respond and say something clever. So imagine you're riding in a university shuttle with a friend who notices a Bible in your backpack. Says, I've read the Bible before, he says. I got some interesting stories, but people take it too seriously. It was only written by men. After all, men make mistakes. You try to recall the points your pastor made a few weeks earlier, but about the Bible's inspiration, but come up empty-handed. What do you say? Okay? Don't give me the answer right now. Okay. Hold on one second. Sorry. Example number 2. You're sitting at a car dealer watching TV and waiting with other customers for your car to be serviced. A television news program highlights religious groups trying to influence moral legislation. The person next to you says, haven't these people ever heard of separation of church and state? Those Christians are always trying to force their views on everyone else. You can't legislate morality. Why don't they just leave the rest of us alone? Other people are listening and you don't want to create a scene. But you feel you must say something. What's your next move? So, does a question or comment come to your mind? Okay, so for example number 1, you can't take the Bible too seriously because it was only written by men and men make mistakes. What are you going to say to the person? Anybody? In 10 seconds? It's been more than 10 seconds now. What would you say? Okay, no one? Perfect. If you don't know what you would say, it's perfect because I'm going to tell you right now what you should say. So you remember this in case this situation ever happens. You could say things like, do you have any books in your library? And they'd be like, yeah. You'd be like, were those books written by humans? Yeah. Did you find any truth in them? Yeah. Is there a reason that you think the Bible is less truthful or reliable than other books you own? So those are some good questions to get them thinking. Do people always make mistakes in what they write? Do you think that if God exists, he would be capable of using humans to write down exactly what he wants? And if not, why? Right? So these are some great questions you can ask. All right. Situation 2. It's wrong to force your views on other people. You could ask, do you vote? When you vote for someone, are you expecting your candidate to pass laws reflecting your own point of view? Wouldn't that essentially be forcing your views on others? How is that different from what you are troubled about here? It is your view that only non-religious people should be allowed to vote or participate in politics. Or did I misunderstand you? Where specifically in the Constitution are religious people excluded from the political process? Can you give me an example of legislation that does not have a moral element to it? Are those great questions that get the people kind of like turn around, get them to think? Now, here's the key. When you talk to people, don't tell them. Use questions. Use questions, always. You're not stating anything by asking questions. You're only trying to draw them into conversation. I had this situation where I was having a long conversation on Facebook about a controversial issue. Now, let me say this. Don't debate anyone on Facebook. Learned that about 5 years ago. It never comes across right because no one can tell your tone or your face or how beautiful you are, and so then people forget, right? So don't debate people on Facebook, all right? But I was on Facebook and I just asked questions. I'm like, what about this? And what do you think about this? I never stated a single thing. And someone out of left field said, stop attacking, stop. I'm like, I never said anything. I just asked questions. See, once people say you're attacking me, you can say I didn't attack you because all I asked was questions. If you feel attacked, that has to do with your own points not being solid enough, really. But, so ask questions. Asking questions enables you to escape the charge, you're twisting my words. Question is a request for clarification, specifically so that you do not twist their words. When I ask a clarification question, my goal is to understand a person's view, not to distort it. So we're going to be looking at asking questions and how to ask good questions. So the first type of question is called the Columbo tactic, clarification. Now you guys all know who Columbo is probably, right? Okay, but I didn't know who Columbo was, I just read it in a book. So Columbo was an old detective TV show, and he was kind of a bumbling fool when it came to, he'd come into a crime scene, and he'd be like, where's the body? And they'd be like, it's right there. And so he'd pretend to be kind of stupid, and then he would ask questions, and people were like, this guy is never going to get it, so I'll just answer him. And then he would trap them because they thought because he was asking so questions and acting like he didn't know, that they were surprised when he turned around and found out to be intelligent. Now we don't do that in being tricky, but we do the same thing to get a better understanding of where a person's coming from before we say anything else. So here's the advantage of asking. Sincere questions are friendly and flattering. I was thinking about this. I went to breakfast with my mom, and my mom on Friday, and I was driving home, and I'm like, that was such a nice day with my mom. And then I was like, I realized, I talked the whole time. And I was like, why did I talk the whole time? And I was like, aha, that's why. Because my mom asks so many questions. She's like the queen of asking questions. You know, people love my mom. Like, if you guys got to meet my mom, you guys would just absolutely love her. She's amazing. But if you talk to my mom, you're like, she's the nicest lady in the world. But you don't know anything about her by the time you're done. You can't tell where she works, what she does, what are her interests. No. You know why you feel so good? Because she asks questions about your life. And then you feel special because all she did was just listen to you and ask questions and ask more questions and ask more questions. And you're like, she was the nicest lady ever. But you don't even know if she's nice because she didn't tell you anything, right? But that's just how it works. People like people who are interested in them. And so if you get in a conversation, you can break down walls with somebody who has an opposing view if you just ask them questions. Oh, where did you learn that? Or how did you come to that conclusion? Or what do you mean by that, right? You'll get an education. Here's one thing. You don't know everything about everything. I know, teenagers, you think you know everything about everything. But one day when you hit the age of about 20, 21, actually I would say maybe more like 19, 20, when you start to have to like fill out an application for a job, do your first taxes, you realize, I don't know anything. Or do your own laundry, or whatever it might be, okay? You don't know everything about everything, and the reality is you'll get an education from whoever you're talking to. The best way to learn about Mormonism or Jehovah's Witness or Islam or an atheist is to ask questions, okay? It allows you to make progress on a point without being pushy. You can move the conversation along without being pushy by just asking questions. Okay. What's the purpose for asking? It's to gather more information to better understand the point. To reverse the burden of proof and to lead the conversation in a specific direction. So these are the 3 steps. One of the best questions you can ask when you don't have a question, okay? My daughter thinks it's why, but that's not the best one, because that just sounds like you're just trying to annoy people. Well, why? The best question you can ask if someone was like, well, I don't believe there's a God because science has proven that. You can say, well, what do you mean by science? Or what do you mean by God doesn't exist? Or what do you mean by, and then you'll get a better understanding. So whenever you want to progress a conversation and you don't know what to say, just say, what do you mean by blank? Okay? Reasons for understanding the challenge. Some challenges are vague and it makes no sense to move forward if you're confused or unclear about what is being said. Here's a key. Sometimes, as Christians, we can get in a conversation with somebody about God, and then we just assume, they say they're an atheist, and so we assume this is the box they're put in, right? And so then we just start spewing all we know, and we don't take the time to hear them. We got to find out where they really fall under that category, okay? And if you don't understand a person's point, you may misrepresent it. Be sure to pay attention to the response to your questions. If the meaning is still unclear, follow up with more queries, saying, let me see if I understand you on this. Then feedback the view to make sure you got it right. Okay, I have time. All right, so how many men do I have? Boys. We got boys in here, okay? So, all right, boys. I'm not asking for help. Okay, thanks. All right, but I'm just going to say something because this hits on something I learned for you guys who want to be really good husbands one day. Let me teach you something. I heard one older gentleman tell me that women, they are kind of like the terrorist threat level in America, right? Okay, like we have green, right? Means we're totally safe, no threat. Yellow, which is basically where we always are. It's like at any point it could turn just kind of crazy. And then you got orange, which is like high alert, lock down the borders kind of thing. Red is like imminent threat, nuclear meltdown kind of thing, okay? Now, women are wonderful, and God has created women in such a cool way where they are reactors, and they react to their husbands and things like that. And one of the things is that when it comes to, if they're in a conversation and they're trying to share something with you, you can learn a lot by saying this. Let me see if I understand you on this. You're saying that, Shaniqua called you this name and it made you feel this way, and now you can't go to this thing tomorrow. And they'd be like, that's not what I said at all. And you're like, that's exactly what you said, right? And then you repeat it back, and you know what happens? They're like, whoa, I start to understand what I'm thinking, right? It's the same way. Oh, and getting back to that whole terrorist thing, with ladies, if you say to a woman, like you don't listen to her, that will send her into the orange, okay? If you say things like, if you try to fix it, that will send her into the orange. Like, well, maybe you should just never say, well, maybe you should just. You just say, let me see if I understand you on this, okay? All right? So just be careful. But you guys are way, 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 way far away from that time, so I'm not going to spend much time on that. But you are really close to talking with other people. And so the best thing you could do is say, let me see if I understand you on this. All right. Maybe you're confused because so is your opponent. Maybe he hasn't thought through the implications or grounds of his belief. Do you know you could probably win an argument with anyone in high school by just asking for more clarification? Do you know why? Because they only have this much information on what they believe. And when you ask them just to talk more about it, they're like, oh, right? I know that's how I felt for many, many years, right? So, then the next step is the reversing of the burden of proof. As Christians, we are not the only ones who have to give reasons for why we believe what we believe. The burden of proof is the responsibility someone has to defend or give evidence for his view. Whoever makes the claim bears the burden. Okay? So if you're in a conversation and the person says, there is no God, it's their responsibility to prove that to you. You don't have to say anything to them. Okay? The one who makes the claim has to have the burden of proof. It's not your duty to prove him wrong. It's his duty to prove his view. House without walls. Let's talk about that for a second. Think of an argument like a simple house, a roof supported by walls. The roof is the conclusion and the walls are the supporting ideas. By testing the walls, we can see if they're strong enough to keep the roof from tumbling down. Most people forcefully drop the roof on your head. Ask them to build some walls. Sometimes I'm in the middle of my teachings and I realize how important something is and I get pumped. So I'm super stoked right now. Okay, so this is like moment for you guys right now, okay? Ask how they came to that conclusion. How did you come to that conclusion? All right, I do not believe in evolution. Do you know why? Because the journey of coming to their conclusion, there are no steps in between. They got point A and point B, and there's nothing in between. What do I mean by this? If you go get your biology textbook, they'll take their wand, and they'll say, over millions and millions of years, right? And they just put it in the textbook like it's fact. And then you have to take a test on it, and you have to write papers on it. But the reality is if you study evolution, for example, there is no fossil record of transitional species. There's no fossil record at all. Really, there isn't. Go ask your teacher don't go back and be like, my pastor at this thing I went to. No, don't do that. I got in trouble. Well, the kid got me in trouble once for doing that. So just don't be like little brats about it, okay? But go ask your teacher in honesty, why do you believe in evolution? And what do we have for fossil record? And they'll start saying, well, there was this one tooth that was found in Africa. A tooth? A jawbone? If we're talking millions and billions of years and millions and billions of peoples and animals, don't you think we should find more than just a jawbone or a tooth? Think about it for a second. Ask for, how did you come to that conclusion? Here's another example. How many of you guys like Discovery Channel? Oh man, I love Discovery Channel. So bomb. There was this one called Life. Remember back when these HD cameras started coming out? They had this sweet one where they would set up a DSLR, which was like a camera, and it would take a picture like every couple minutes, and it was on a track, and it was in this forest, and it would go up the track, and it would go up the tree, and what it caused is you would see the vine moving through the forest, growing and moving, and it would follow the vine. It was so cool. And it was this rad show. And the whole show was talking about insects, this one episode, and Oprah was doing the narration, and she was talking about insects and birds and how they help pollinate and all these cool things. And I was like, man, this is an awesome show. And then there was this scene where there's all these sunflowers, right? I love sunflowers. I cannot get them to grow. I've been trying for 3 years. Anyway, but she's above all. No, she's not. She's narrating in a studio. But it's this panning shot over all these sunflowers, and she says, millions of years before the birds and the insects ever existed, we had plants. And I'm like, I took my DVR and I was like, did you just hear that? And Megan's like, what? And I was like, she just spent an entire show showing how the ecosystem is dependent on each other. That plants can't survive without birds and insects, and vice versa. And then she just said they spent millions of years without each other. I'm like, and there's no evidence for it. She just makes a claim and people are like, oh yeah. Yeah, they just existed millions of years apart. Ask the question, are people dropping roofs on your head, right? The roof is the conclusion, have them build you some walls. I hope you guys know at Truth Quest, I've been building walls for you. Showing you manuscript evidence, I've been showing you prophecies, I've been laying out books that you can read. You can start knocking on my walls, and be like, all right, I'm not so sure about this evidence. I'll be like, okay, here's a book, or here's a website, or here's an answer. I'm not afraid of that, okay? When something is false or it has a shaky foundation, poke at it. So, reverse the burden of proof. You say, why do you say that? Or what's your reasons for holding that view? The first question is, what do you mean by, tells us what he thinks. The second question, how did you come to that conclusion, tells us why he thinks what he thinks. It forces persons you are in conversation with to give you an account for their own beliefs. Christians should not be the only ones to have to defend their views. Reject the impulse to counter every assertion someone manufactures. Reversing the burden of proof questions. Is it that possible? Okay, is it plausible? Is it probable? So as you're asking the question, can it be really done? When they give you an answer, you go, okay, they give me an answer. Yeah, it's possible that we've evolved for millions of years. Okay. Is it plausible? Is it reasonable? Doesn't seem totally reasonable. Is it probable? Is it the best explanation considering all of the evidence? No, it's not the best evidence, okay? Now, exception to the rule. There are only a few exceptions to the burden of proof rule. They are usually obvious. We are not obligated, for example, to prove our own existence, to defend self-evident truth, or just justify the basic reliability of our senses. Also, pick your battles. An unwritten law of nature to govern exchanges like these is, the man with the microphone wins. Okay? So don't take on your professor when you go to college. You're never going to win, even if you have better facts than this. Don't take on your teacher. You probably won't win, unless it's a situation where it's a one-on-one. Okay? Because you'll always look foolish because they're the one that has the authority. They're the ones that have the microphone. Okay? But you can say, teacher, can I ask you a question? What do you mean by evolution? They're never going to see that as a challenge. You just ask questions and see where it goes. I had some kids ask one of your teachers, do you believe in evolution? They're like, no. And it was the main teacher that was teaching evolution at your high school for many, many years. And she didn't believe in evolution. And I was like, wow, that's kind of surprising, But she had to teach it because the state requires it. So ask questions. All right, leading questions. What's a leading question? Ultimately, we want to win someone over to prove our point of view. But we don't want to force our opinions. Instead, we want to persuade. When the steps to a conclusion are both clear and reasonable, it's much easier to convince someone because he has seen the route clearly. He can even retrace it on his own if he wants to. With each question, we lead him closer towards our destination. For example, I would be able to better convince you about the truth that I'm teaching now if we were one-on-one. You know why? Because I would ask you questions. Because I would know, what are you struggling with? What are you having doubts about when it comes to God? And then I would ask you questions. And I would continue to ask you questions. And I would lead you in a certain direction. And then you know what would happen? You'd be like, you'd come to a conclusion and you'd be like, wow, I don't know how I came to that conclusion. And I could not say anything at all. Once you learn how to drive, for Borrego kids, it's usually 18. But when you learn to drive one day, you'll be realizing that it's a lot easier to find your way back if you're the one driving than the guy in the passenger seat, right? Because you're the ones that took the turns, you were paying attention. The same way in a conversation. If the person is talking, they'll remember how they got there. But if they're just listening to you, they're like, man, I don't even know why I came to the conclusion that God exists. Right? So, unlike the first two questions, this one requires knowledge to some kind. So, listen carefully. Listen carefully to what the person is saying. Really carefully. Man, I am the worst. And this is a guy thing. You are listening, but you're thinking about what you're going to say next, right? Yeah, that's really interesting. And then they're like, were you even listening to me right now? No. if I wasn't. Right? Yeah. Like, sometimes, yeah, my wife would attest to this. I can just be like, and they're like, or, oh, that's great. I just said that someone died. Oh, man, that's not great. Oh, I'm sorry, you know. Listen very carefully. Pay attention to people. And then locate the error. So listen and be like, oh. You hear that flag, you're like, oh, that's not right. Okay, so pay attention. This step is more demanding because you have to be able to see some weakness in the person's argument before you can work with it. How do you find the flaw? There is no special formula for making the discovery. The key is to pay close attention to the answer to the question. How did you come to that conclusion? Then ask yourself if the person's conclusion is justified by the evidence he gives. Now, what you can do is you can take it for a test drive. So meaning, first adopt the person's viewpoint for the sake of argument. Next, give the idea a test drive. Try to determine whether you'll end up, if you follow his instructions faithfully. If you arrive at an odd destination, point it out and invite the person to reconsider his starting point. So take a minute and go, okay, let me think about that. If I believed in reincarnation and then I died, and think about what they're saying and then like put yourself in their shoes and go, wait, that wouldn't work because of this. Because that's usually how you'll find where they're wrong, is you adopt their view and you think about it for a second. And then after that, choose your direction and what you're going to lead them with. You need to know the specific direction you want the conversation to go, the precise purpose you want to accomplish with your leading question. Do you want to use your question to clarify a point, to convey new information, to expose a weakness? You have to know your target to aim at it before you can continue. And then point out errors with questions. Critics are rarely prepared to defend their own faith. They have seldom thought through what they believe and have relied more on generalizations and slogans than on careful reflection. Check this out. If someone says, I don't believe in God because of science, you know how quickly you can break it down with one sentence? Well, what science has caused you not to believe in God? Well, science. No, like what specifically do you mean by science? Like what evidence? That like what really got you? Well, like they've just done studies to show that like in labs, well, it doesn't, like what was it? Well, like quantum physics, that's the one I always get. Quantum physics proves, I'm like, oh, that's super interesting. I got in a conversation with one guy, I said, quantum physics disproves God. And then I said, I don't really understand quantum physics because I'm not a physicist, but you seem like you know what you're talking about. And this guy did know a lot about what he's talking about. I'm like, what do you mean by quantum physics, how it disproves the cosmological argument? And he was like, well, I really don't know. Like, I haven't spent a lot of time digging into it, but you could read this article. And then I read the article and I was like, well, this is what kind of like what I'm getting from it. What do you think? He's like, well, yeah, well, maybe it doesn't disprove it. I'm like, so getting back to my first point, why does science disprove that God doesn't exist? He's like, well, I'm going to have to spend some more time to think about that, you know? And so here I've led somebody to do some digging. I put a rock in his shoe. Does that make sense? Right? So a lot of times they won't spend the time to think about it. Behold, they send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So make sure that you spend the time to be gentle and think of what are the things that that you can expose. One of the phrases you can use for this third step is have you considered, to introduce your concern, then offering a difference of view that gently questions the person's beliefs or confronts a weakness with his argument. Like, have you considered that if the Bible were merely written by men, it would be very hard to account for fulfilled prophecy? How would you explain that? Okay? So you can, it's so gentle. You see how gentle that is? You'd be like, well, have you ever considered that there's physics is so fine-tuned and da-da-da-da-da-da? And they'd be like, oh, no, I never considered that. Instead of, well, you know, technically, or you know what, you know, and telling them it that way. Another way you can do this is, can you clear this up for me, or can you help me understand this? Done that one too, right? Like I just said. I don't really understand quantum physics. Can you explain it to me? I don't, you know, something like that. Can you clear this up for me? Is a good way to do it. One of the reasons that this approach is so attractive that it emphasizes a respect for the person you disagree with. Meaning that when you say, can you clear this up for me, or have you considered, you're not insulting their intelligence, and instead you're complimenting their intelligence and asking them, since they know what they're talking about, to clarify it a little bit better. But a lot of times they don't know what they're talking about, and so then that exposes the error and then causes them to do more research. Narrating the debate. Sometimes the opponent might dodge the question or move on to a new topic. Make sure he answers the original question with reasons. You can say something like, I want you to notice what just happened. First, you made a fairly controversial statement, and I asked you a couple questions about it. So far, you haven't answered them. Instead, you have taken off in another direction. Before we move on to a new topic, would it be okay if we finish the old one? I'm really interested in your response. My grandma, I hope she's not watching, is a atheist. I love my grandma. She's super awesome, in case you're watching. But I've had a lot of great conversations with her, and she spends a lot of time watching PBS and things like that. Anyway, I've gone in conversations with her, and this is what happens. Is she goes, well, science is this, and I'll talk about this. She's like, well, what about, the Christians and their opposition to gay marriage? And I'm like, what does that have to do with the existence of God right now? And it's gone like over here and then over here. And so what I say is, Grandma, originally we were talking about this. She's like, oh, yeah, that's right. And so then we go back to that conversation. So take some time to narrate the debate, because people will often not realize that they've gone in this direction. Because all they're trying to do, if people are jumping topics, it's not really that they want to know an answer. It's that they're just trying to disprove that Christianity is false, okay? So two things help generate, whoops, I skipped ahead a little bit. So narrate the debate. Perfect your tactics. The more sweat and training, the less you bleed in battle. This is a Marine motto. So sweat more, bleed less, right? Sweat more, bleed less. So this is an important thing. So if you take the time to prepare, you're not going to bleed in battle. First, take the time to prepare and anticipate questions. Second, take the time for assessment after you've had a conversation. And third, practice. The guy who wrote this book that this whole message is based upon, Tactics, he said, sometimes I practice this way when I'm alone in the car listening to talk radio. After listening to a few comments by the host or a caller, I turn down the volume and then pretend it's my job to respond to what's said. It's almost like being on a live radio, except if I say something foolish, no one hears it. So do that. Like if you're listening to talk radio, be like, oh, that doesn't sound right. Turn it down and just talk in your car to yourself. And be like, well, actually, and respond to it and get some practice. So practice. Practice makes perfect. And then also, Truth Quest is not enough, guys, for you guys to know why you believe what you believe. Because you're only going to remember 8% of what I said. Okay, so I'm probably going to be speaking for 12 hours to you this whole entire week. So that means that you'll remember, like, what would that be, like an hour of what I said or something like that, or less. So make sure you take the time to study it for yourself. Now this is fun. This is where it gets real fun. Suicide. Self-destructing views. All right? Self-destructing views. Hold on a second. We're not talking about real suicide. Okay? We're talking about issues that implode, meaning that when people say something, they don't realize they just defeated themselves. Okay? We talked about this a little bit already. There is no truth, right? Is that statement true? Okay? It's one of the questions you can ask them. No one can know any truth about religion. And how precisely do you come to know the truth about religion? Talking about God is meaningless. What does this statement mean about God? Right? You can only know truth through experience. What experience taught you that truth? Never take anyone's advice on that issue. Should I take your advice on that? Okay? Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. It's not crowded, it's crowded. Okay? I wish I had an answer to that, but I'm tired of answering that question. I don't know the answer to that question, and I know the answer to that question. See, it's a self-defeating statement. This page is intentionally left blank. The page is blank, the page is not blank. You are in rare form as usual. Your performance is rare, your performance is not rare. The terrorists have technology we don't even know about. We know about things we don't know about, right? So these are self-defeating statements, and people make them all the time. And so pay attention to that. For example, it's not true unless it's proven by science. I love this one. The next time someone dismisses you with, Only science gives us reliable truth card. Ask if he wants to take his statement as fact or simply as unsubstantiated opinion. In fact, ask what testable scientific evidence led him to his conclusion. As it turns out, this claim is not a fact of science. It's a philosophical assertion about science that itself cannot be proven by the scientific method and would therefore be unreliable according to this approach. Okay? So you guys track with that? That if you ask someone, it's not true unless it's proven by science, and you say, well, how does science prove that statement? Right? Because that statement can't be proven by science. That's a philosophical statement, not a scientific statement. You are what you eat. I once saw a sign in a restaurant that read, "You are what you eat." I pointed out to the waitress that if we are what we eat, then we shouldn't be something until we have eaten something. But we can't eat something unless we are something. Therefore, it's not true what we are what we eat.
Whoa,
All right? Okay. Deep, right? Yeah. Greg Kokel is not the kind of guy you just have normal conversations with. But yeah, so it's a self-defeating statement.
Eat something, you're not something.
Okay. Then we talk about the Rhodes Scholar. Okay. When an article tells you what a scholar believes, you have been informed. When an article tells you why he holds a view, you have been educated. Ask for his reasons, not his credentials. This drives me crazy. This is another thing they use in your textbooks. Dr. So-and-so says, blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. I don't care what a doctor says. He better give me reasons for why he said what he said. Okay? Think about that for a second. It doesn't matter how educated a person is if they don't give you reasons for why they came to that conclusion. Okay? We can trust them more because they're educated, but it doesn't mean that we put blind faith in them. Right? Remember, reasons are more important than votes. If reasoning is bad, if the facts are bad or the judgments are tainted by philosophic bias, doesn't matter if you're talking with scholars or students, the view is still compromised. Okay. Just the facts. Did they give me reasons, evidence, or facts, or views? When citing facts in your defense, precise numbers are always more persuasive than general figures. Okay, so make sure that when you're saying something, don't say something generally, okay? Because people don't trust that. So to say something like 3,000 people died in the 9/11 attacks is general. But to say 2,900, and I forgot the number, which that's not the argument I'm making, it holds weight because it's like, wow, that person spent the time to give us definite numbers. So make sure you spend the time to get definite answers. What we say and how we say it can make all the difference. So sweat more and bleed less later. What does this mean? Guys, I hope that I could turn you guys into readers and into people who will Blaine Shugart, into people who will spend the time to search for answers and not just accept every little thing you hear. Listen, you guys can spend all the time in your life. Let me rephrase this. We are a culture of entertainment. And so it's easy to get all of our information from just entertainment. But do something more than that. Get good information and spend some time thinking. Because your eternal destiny might depend on it. Somebody else's eternal destiny might depend on it. Imagine how bad you would feel if in a couple weeks from now, someone comes up to you and say, "Do you believe in God?" And you say, "Yeah." And they say, "Well, why do you believe God exists?" And you're like, "Oh, great. I went to this Truth Quest thing and because of physics." And they're like, "What do you mean by physics?" "Well, I don't know, but I kind of know." Okay, spend some time to actually know what you're talking about, you know? A lot of times, I don't know what I'm talking about, and if you don't know what you're talking about and someone asks you a question, you know what you say? You don't make it up, all right? You don't make it up. What you say is, "I don't know, can I get back to you on that?" Or what you do is you go, "Hold on one second, and I'll give you my cell phone number there. Pastor Ryan, I'm talking to my friend right now, and they want to know about this. Can you talk to him for a minute?" And I'll talk to him, okay? All right, so something like that. But don't let me be your like phone a friend on like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. All right, you only get one of those. No, I'm just kidding. All right, you can call me a couple times, but try to know it for yourself. All righty, okay. We have ice cream for the junior hires and cookies for tonight. So, and oh, check this out. What?
No,
Videos, no.
Oh man.